Some people call him Your Honor. Others call him Professor. Even others call him Esquire. I call him Dad. Part 2 of the Honorable Robinson Oscar Everett's coming up next. Good morning. Welcome to Carolina People. This morning we're at Garden City Furniture at 2444 Highway 17 Business South in Garden City. We're focused on part 2 of the Honorable Robinson Oscar Everett. Good morning again, Dad. Glad to have you back.
Great to be back.
It's thrilling to have you yesterday. All week, we kicked off the week with Dr. Charles Sasser, the medical director for Mercy Hospice and Palliative Care. And on Tuesday and Wednesday, Flo Vinson, who you had met recently at a North Carolina bar event, who happens to be the president of the South Carolina bar, was with us. And on Wednesday, after her interview, she was headed up to New York for the American Bar Association meeting. Very exciting time. And, of course, the opportunity to get you in, having 2 lawyers this week, both from families of lawyers. Flo herself practiced is from a family where 3 of her older brothers are lawyers. Of course, you, having practiced with your mother and father, and soon to practice with your son and daughter-in-law. And
hopefully.
That's right. And, of course, they just took the bar last Tuesday and Wednesday, I believe.
They've taken it and are waiting for results.
I know, which we're all excited about. As you had mentioned, Mother, Dad, and me was the Everett at one time. Now it'll be you, Luke, and Sherry, Everett, and Everett in action again.
I'm looking forward to it.
And y'all's law office is there in Durham.
In Durham, right out on Irwin Road near Duke University.
It's housed in Irwin Terrace, I believe.
That's right. Wonderful landlord.
You've got a good landlord, don't you?
Yeah.
Is he or she pretty hard on the rent?
I tell you, he and she are doing pretty well by us.
Yeah, that is great. And, of course, you've also got Luke and Sherry, who will be joining the firm hopefully in a couple of months. Have a wine bar there, 6 Plates Wine Bar, which is housed there virtually right below your office.
That's
2
right.
floors down.
That's right.
We
can drop in on it very easily.
Yeah, a little after work pop in there. You know, so much of yesterday of what we talked about, obviously, Dad, you were growing up in Durham and then attending Harvard Law School, returning to Durham to teach there at Duke Law School, but more importantly to practice with your parents. Of course, then you left for a while, came back to Durham, and I think we left the picture yesterday in the mid-50s, which is about the time. As you think back to the early years of practicing there with your parents, were there some things that going on there that really stand out in your mind, something that your father may have inspired you to really stick it out?
Well, there are 2 or 3 things that I remember particularly. One, of course, is not directly related to law, but indirectly, and that is that both mother and father were interested in public service, and my mother was one of the first 2 women to serve on the city council of the city of Durham.
Right.
And my father in the 20s and early 30s, as I recall, had been a legislator in the state legislature in Raleigh, and had served 5 terms over there and had rendered public service. And by the same token, in the law practice, they tried to help people, and they were less interested in the fees than in helping the client. And they would really put themselves out. My father set an example for me by taking cases that a lot of other people wouldn't take because they were, unpopular. He would represent murderers if he thought they were innocent, or even if he thought they were guilty, if he could help them get as light a sentence as possible. He felt everybody deserved good representation. Mm-hmm. My mother told me at a later time about how when I was a small baby, she got a call from the Associated Press, and they said, "Has Mr. Everett gotten home yet?" It was the end of the day. She said, "No. Why are you calling?" They said, "Well, the last time we heard anything about him, people were shooting at him."
Oh, God.
And he had gone to a neighboring community to assist 2 African-American lawyers from Durham who were representing a young black man accused of raping a white woman. which was obviously a very, very unpopular type case back in the late 20s, early 30s.
Boy, I bet.
And apparently at the end of the day, the court had recessed, and Father and his two colleagues walked out to the automobile. He had driven them up, and there was a mob there. They didn't know what was going to happen, and he told them to jump in the back of the car, get down to the bottom, and he took off for Durham. And apparently at that point there was noise of gunfire. Somebody said backfire from the engine, who knows. But I remember he told me that they got back to Durham. The other lawyers did not want to go back the next day. I mean, they felt there was a lot of risk. And he in turn said, "You've got to go back. We have to go back.
Right.
We cannot be frightened out of performing duty for our clients."
Right.
And so they went. And I think they lost the case. I don't know what happened, but at least they provided the representation that the defendant was entitled to. Father had another interesting case that went to the North Carolina Supreme Court. He had mentioned it to me, and I at a later time read the opinion. But there was a Jewish shopkeeper in Durham, and this is about the beginning of the 1920s, and he went in to pay his water bill, and he had it all in pennies, several hundred pennies, and the guy at the counter, the clerk, was very unhappy, knocked the pile of pennies over, made some very insulting remarks, which were anti-Semitic. And ultimately, my father represented this man in suing the city of Durham because a public official should not engage in that type of conduct.
Right.
And the case went up to the North Carolina Supreme Court, where Chief Justice Walter Clark wrote a famous opinion, basically saying, how can you tolerate this sort of conduct? You have to uphold the rights of the person who is a citizen, who is part of one of the oldest cultures in the world, a culture from which we've inherited many, many things, and we're not going to allow this to be done. And so the father's client obtained a verdict against the city of Durham and established a point. And that particular opinion during the 20s was cited quite a bit, I understand, because it was a judicial criticism of anti-Semitism.
Right, right.
So father represented a lot of people who were not highly regarded by some portions of society, but who he thought deserved good representation and who he thought deserved support.
You think that representation impacted you, caused you to really stick it out or take on some cases that may not have been popular or may not have been, you may have been considered quixotic or like Don Quixote?
Well, I can think of one instance back during the 90s, after I'd finished my term as Chief Judge of the Court of Military Appeals. And right after my mother died, I got involved with a friend, a lady whom I had represented before in connection with an accident in which her husband was killed and she was badly injured. In any event, she and I initiated a lawsuit together with you. You were
I was one of the 5 plaintiffs, that's right.
A secretary we had, and a colleague of mine from Duke Law School. The 5 of us initiated a lawsuit which many people thought had the chance of the proverbial snowball you-know-where.
Right.
And we sued Attorney General Janet Reno, the governor of North Carolina, everybody in sight, because in 1990, the North Carolina legislature had adopted a system of, a plan for congressional redistricting, which appeared to us to have been drawn with a racial motive. It was sort of like a quota system built in, and sometimes described as a racial gerrymander. And the basic idea was to assure that a congressman, an African-American congressman, would be elected from a district in northeastern North Carolina, and another would be elected from a district which was like a thread running from Durham down to Charlotte and Gastonia.
Right.
And our view was this just isn't right.
Right.
Well, we got a lot of flack, and I'd always had good ties with the African American community, but many members of that community thought that it was very inappropriate for me to be attacking a racial gerrymander. Well, we went up to the Supreme Court on that 4 different times, and with differing results, but we established some important principles. Mm-hmm. And I felt that was the sort of thing that my dad would have wanted me to do if he had still been alive, or my mother, because they believed in principle.
Right.
And it wasn't, you didn't practice law to make money. You wanted to make a little money, you want to support yourself and your family. But you wanted to assure that the system of justice ran efficiently and fairly. Mm-hmm. One of the things I was happy about when I was Chief Judge of the Court of Military Appeals, and even earlier, was that I had a part in trying to improve and enhance the military justice system, because service members deserve the best. And back in the early 50s, I had been a counsel working with Senator Sam Ervin, famous senator from North Carolina, in trying to modify and upgrade the Uniform Code of Military Justice.
I remember reading about that, yeah.
In 1968, our efforts resulted in some important improvements. For example, authorizing military judges for the first time, trying to give them status.
Right.
So I was able to work in that capacity, and then I chaired a committee for the American Bar, which worked in the area of military justice. This was in the late 70s. And then in turn, on the Court of Military Appeals, as it was then called, I was able to help achieve, I think, a movement forward in military justice, which in some ways makes it the fairest system we have.
Really? And how would that be?
Well, in terms of right to counsel, for example, right to counsel provided service members, be they an E1, a buck private, or a 4-star general, they get free counsel, trained military counsel. There are privileges against self-incrimination, which have been expanded into warning requirements. In military justice, there is a review of the appropriateness of the sentence. If it's a serious case, a review designed to assure not only the sentence is lawful, but that it is appropriate for the particular facts. So it is a more detailed review, a more careful counsel provided automatically at all levels of the military justice system. It's a system that has, I think, in many ways been become distinctive, and it's unfortunate they didn't use that system in connection with trying the detainees and the terrorists. I think that might have worked better than the use of the military commissions.
Right.